I don't know, you could kind of cue some kind of like sci-fi theme music here, but like what is the future of work? And how the heck do we figure it out? What are all the unknowns? How do you navigate uncertainty? You know, like AI, all the things. There's just so many things that people talk about at the moment. How do you handle change? What are the skills needed for the future? We could go on. And we will. I'm joined by Steph Clarke today, and we're talking about all things future. Is that a good sentence to open with?
Yeah, sure. That'll do. We can work with that.
We can work with that.
We're talking about what's next.
What's next? I love it. And I will just give you the heads up. Steph Clarke is a futurist and she does this work day in, day out. Let's go. This is a podcast about making work work. You'll learn about leadership, career growth, and how to navigate those weird work challenges. I run a HR consulting business called Boldside, where I help leaders build epic team cultures. If you lead a team or run a business and you think I can help, let's connect on LinkedIn. My name is Shelley Johnson, and this is Work. Steph Clarke, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, Shelley. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so we're talking about the future of work, change, how do you handle all the weird uncertainty in the world right now, which is like everywhere. I'm going to start off with something you and I have riffed on over text, which...
We've riffed on a few things over text.
Which
I'm
one?
worried which one people chewing in airport lounges.
Oh, yeah. We did have a fair few weird audio messages about people chewing loudly and weird eating habits in airports. So there's that.
That's another episode, though.
That's its whole own episode. It's going to be totally digging into all the gross things that happen in an airport. Okay, is future-proofing your career a big lie we've bought into?
Yes. Next question.
Good. And podcast done.
End of podcast. Click button, do intro.
And make sure you write down that. Yes, it is. And we're moving on.
Yeah. So future-proofing anything is a lie. And I know it gets used. And I know this is one of these things that people just use that language and they don't necessarily mean that language, but it's kind of like become the language. So whatever. But future-proofing is kind of impossible because you can't future-proof anything because things will always change. So it's not like, oh, good, we're future-proof now. Nothing can ever damage us, stop us, change us, whatever. Like, no, you can only ever be future-ready, future-prepared, future flexible. I don't know, like there's a bunch of other ways you could probably put that, but future-proof is not one of them. And I think if we're telling ourselves that we've made something future-proof, we are probably, kidding ourselves. And I think, an example might be, there was a bunch of people who moved into offices in probably late 2019, early 2020, and they probably thought they were future-proof because they had the latest tech, or they had more walls that could move, or they had space for people your workforce to expand or whatever. Were they future-proof? Probably not, because they probably weren't future-proof for what happened less than a year later.
I love that language, future, I was going to say future flexible. Future flexible. Like, is that, and maybe this comes down to what are we actually needing to aspire to? Because like that rhetoric around, hey, here's how you future-proof your career. And I saw LinkedIn just did a big thing on how to future-proof your career. And it's like what you're saying is, well, we don't know what the future looks like. So how can you proof against anything that you don't know what it's going to even look like in the first place?
Yeah. And the fact that means we're probably making predictions, and predictions are predictably wrong. So therefore, like, none of it makes sense. I mean, ultimately, we should probably be moving towards something that's like anti-fragile, to use Nassim Taleb's language. We're probably looking for something to be anti-fragile. So actually, when the bad things happen, or the thing changes, we get stronger and more resilient against that change. But maybe that's high ambition. But at best, we can probably be more flexible or have more of an ability to think about what possibly may happen, not predict it, because no one can do that. And anyone who tells you they can is probably trying to just take your money, and they're probably lying to you. So therefore, if we're looking at possibilities and we're looking at what could happen, then we can start to stress test possible futures against our current plans or future plans, be like, okay, would these stand up against these possible futures? And not just our preferred future of, oh, well, I'd like this to happen, so therefore let's plan for that. It's like, cool, but that might not happen because that's just what you want to happen. And I think sometimes we're also a bit too tied to that future.
If we were going to aim towards being future flexible, what would that look like?
As an individual, as an organisation, like what do you
Let's
where do you
split
start?
it out. Do you want to start at the individual level or the organisation and then move to the organisation level?
Yeah, let's do that. So at an individual level, I think for both, the commonalities between the two are the ability to actually look up and look outside and be like, what is actually happening around me? And, in futures, we call that this looking for the signals of change. And it doesn't really matter what you call it. But looking up and looking outside. And so often when I work with teams or work with organisations, they are not doing that. They are so myopic in their inbox, because that is the thing that is on fire that day. Or maybe, what's just happening in their organisation or maybe in their industry at a stretch. But beyond that, maybe there's some headlines that, they're going to be aware of the AI stuff, but maybe not to the extent that they could be, should be, depending on what it is, to really then imagine, okay, well, what might happen next? What might happen over the next 5 years, 10 years, et cetera? And what do I need to do about that so I can actually decide what sort of future do I want to move towards or away from, or actually shape mitigating or avoiding something? So looking up and looking outside would be the biggest thing, and actually having more of those conversations in your teams and in your families and things. There's a fantastic book. It was one of the books that sort of changed my life, certainly changed my work life, which was Imaginable by Jane McGonigal. So Jane is the director of the Institute for the Future, who are a think tank and futures group out of Palo Alto in California. Jane lives in California, famously quite fiery in terms of their landscape, which we're very, I suppose, accustomed to in a lot of Australia as well. And her family have a recurring conversation every year, at least once or twice a year, which is how many days are we prepared to have all of our windows closed because there's too much smoke and not be able to go outside and do the stuff we love before we consider moving somewhere else? Either temporarily, just during the sort of fire season, which obviously is getting longer and longer as well, or permanently. And I just think that is such a lovely, neat example of good future proofing, to use that word, or good future flexibility, because they know what the threshold is. And they're having that conversation really regularly. It's not just this like kind of woolly what if kind of conversation. It is, how many days are we prepared to stay indoors and exist in this place that's smoky and fiery and dangerous and things, and we may need to escape from or whatever, before we would consider moving somewhere else. So they'll know before it's too late, because they'll be like, oh, we've gone past that. Now's the time to go. Or now's the time to change that plan, or now's the time to do something different. And I think that, it's just such a cool example of really good, smart decision-making and regular conversation about signals of change, knowing what they are, knowing what the measure is, and then knowing what you're going to do as a result of that.
So as someone who works in this space with organisations and you're helping them do that activity of looking up and looking out, can you just talk me through, for you, what do you see as some of the signals of change at the moment?
Like with most things, it depends, because it depends on the industry, it depends on the team, et cetera, that we were looking at. But what is really interesting is I've done a bunch of projects over the last, say, 12, 18 months. And quite often the conversation will start with technology, AI, obviously, in particular, not exclusively. Robotics is definitely in that as well, with some particularly the healthcare clients that I've been working with. And so we'll start there. But actually, when we get into the meat of it, so I'll do a bit of research, and that'll be a combination of kind of interviews, conversations, maybe some study tours, field trip kind of things, a lot of desktop review research as well, and create a big kind of mural board of all the different themes and all the different stuff I'm seeing. Be a few hundred things on that on that mural board into different categories, and then we map those categories. And the work I do within the exec team, the board typically, is mapping those categories to like the areas of highest impact and the highest uncertainty. And it's the ones that are high uncertainty and high impact that we need to have some different conversations on. Because if it's high impact and certain, you should already be doing something about it, because we know it's going to happen and we know it's high impact. Therefore, we should already be planning for that thing. So if we then come back to those different themes, so often we start with a conversation about technology, but when we get into the stuff that is high impact and high uncertainty, there'll be some AI stuff in there or whatever. But actually, more often than not in these projects, we've come down to trust, the decline in public trust. We've come back to things around sort of the social fabric. We've come back to things around like disinformation and misinformation, because those things are really uncertain about where we're going to go, like as a society, as a country, as in the world, and how those might play out. And the impact of those in some of the clients and sort of industries I've been working with is incredibly high. Like I did this project with a library group last year, which was a complete joy, as you can imagine. And
as someone who loves books, loves reading.
Exactly. It's the dream, future of libraries. We did have a conversation around, in a world where social trust and kind of community fabric is maybe eroding, and there's evidence of that. What is the role of a library in that world? What is the role of a librarian in countering misinformation and disinformation? So, and I think the other thing often with that is actually being really clear on what is the domain of change we're looking at. So another client I was working with early last year, they came to me, they're like, oh, Steph, we need something around the future of retail. I was like, okay, we had a little chat. But then in the conversation, after a few minutes, and this client were a homewares retailer, and I was like, I think you need a conversation about the future of home. And they were just like, oh, that's way more interesting. I was like, yeah, it's way more interesting. Because actually we get quite stuck in our field or our domain of retail in that situation. But actually, the customers, the clients that you're selling into, their industry, their world, that's the stuff that will change, that then will change you. So actually reframing that one from either, instead of the future of retail, the future of home, like that was a really different conversation, and one I probably biasly think is much more interesting and much more impactful to their business than just, will we still have stores or not?
So then thinking about this idea of high impact, high certainty.
High uncertainty, yeah.
Well, like if I was to put it into the quadrant of,
yes, yeah.
Okay, so high impact, high certainty, we just need to act on.
Yeah.
And then the sticky one and the stressful one, high impact, high uncertainty. Mm-hmm. How do you, if you think about, let's apply this to an individual level. So right now, people listening, they might be a manager of a team, they might be a head of HR, they might be an accountant who's just thinking about in their own career, going back to the idea of we can't future-proof because the future is unknown, but we can be future flexible. What would be the things in your career you would bucket into high impact and high uncertainty?
I mean, at the moment, the role of AI would be, because you just don't know how that's going to, and we don't know. We can have some good ideas about how that may impact different industries, different roles, etc., in terms of automation and things like that, and and agents into that piece. But we don't know how long it's going to take, or when it will happen, and what skills I might need, and will this company actually even get that far? And I think in Australia, there's a really interesting place in Australia because our trust of AI is the lowest in the world.
Really?
Yeah. Really interesting. And we're made up a lot of the middle kind of companies. So we've got like the big end of town, like Atlassians and things like that, and Canva, of course, who have gone really hard on AI because they can't afford not to, because they're operating at such a big scale. And the banks to an extent, and some of the others too. So you've got that end of the scale. And then you've got the startups that are just going to be AI native, and they'll just be building that way. And some of them may not survive and blah, 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 but they'll be that way. And then you've got everyone else. And I don't know, I just wonder in Australia how long it's going to take that middle, which is a lot of individual businesses, to move as fast as we're hearing from other places, in other geographies, but also to realise some of the potential. I think there's so much danger as well. Like I'm definitely not an AI optimist, but as a result, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around how long it will take. Will we ever get there? Will some industries ever get there? Will some industries and organisations even survive long enough to do it because of the other disruption that's happening around there as well? So anyway, all of those things. So I think that is a big uncertain and high impact piece for that individual piece in that top right-hand corner. I think there's this sort of broad, the economic kind of sort of state of the world as well, and the uncertainty there around tariffs, around the kind of impacts of the kind of one country does something and everyone else gets impacted by it. Is another kind of piece there as well. The kind of just general economic state. And then with that, probably the impact then on Australia of, with house prices and stuff like that as well, because we do tend to be a more property, economic markets. So there's that. And then I think within individual organisations, there's probably other things you could map there based on the industry, like regulation. So, some of the industries I've been working in around healthcare, around disability as well, there's a lot of legislation changes coming as a result of royal commissions, as a result of restructures of things like NDIA and stuff like that. So you've got then legislation changes too. So those will have high impact and maybe be quite uncertain around what way would the government go on, or the regulators, or depending on who it is, will go on certain areas and issues, which could fundamentally change the structure and the roles of certain businesses and certain industries. So you can do that.
Yeah. And even just thinking about, like, if I was to put a really good example of high impact, high uncertainty would be like Trump economics, where he makes a tweet, he puts a tweet out, and then all of a sudden the stock market either goes up or down according to his unpredictability. Yeah. And that's wild to me to think, like, if you were to say 8 years ago, someone would be tweeting something on Twitter and it would cause major, major economic disruption. Yeah. We would not have known, and we would not have been able to future-proof against that thing. No. So if I'm just thinking out loud around how you might apply this in your work context, let's say you start to identify, okay, in my unique context, if you're in mining, for example, climate, all the stuff going on in that space around, you mentioned like the legislative change, what the government decides to do in certain kind of forums, high uncertainty but high impact. Well, then how do I personally flex, to use your beautiful language, to adapt with what's changing? What strategies then, if you go through that process and you maybe drop that quadrant down that Steph described of certainty on one axis,
impact on the other.
You've captured, here's the things that are highly uncertain that have high impact. What do you do about those things? Because that's where I'm like, the natural tendency is like, I have no idea. I can tell the way AI is impacting me, if I'm a copywriter, if I'm in any industry, the way AI is impacting me is massive, but then what do I do with that?
Yeah. Well, copywriting is an interesting example as well, because I've seen some, and I know quite a few copywriters, or follow or know of quite a few copywriters, and it feels like they've almost made a choice. A lot of them have gone, right, I'm going to embrace it, this is how I'm going to use it. And others are like, no, I'm going to double down on this is human and written and organic and whatever language they're kind of putting around it. And there's not, and both of them are making a bet, basically, on what's going to resonate with their clients or still provide them with an income and all of those things. And I know other people who have gone, you know what, my industry is probably limited in its shelf life now, so I'm out. I'm going to bounce. I'm going to try something else. I've been doing some work with a client recently who the organisation are going through a humongous change, like existential level change in their business. And we've been doing this at a personal level. So I've been, firstly, I suppose, at an organisational level around that axis around uncertainty and impact. And then bringing that down to a personal level. So I've then got everyone to do their own one of those axes around what's uncertain and things. And then what I've been asking them to do is create some possible future scenarios, which are the things that, what possible futures may play out for them over the next 3 years. And I've just done 3. 3 is generally not really long enough, but for this context, it works. So what might play out in the next 3 years? And the scenario I've asked them to start with is, it's the 1st of October, 2028. Today is my first day, ... And just to kind of get them to think, like, what could I be doing in 3 years that then is as a result of what happens now, and the choices I make now as well, and actually realizing that we do actually have some agency, even though some of those things, like, we can't control what Trump tweets or puts on Truth Social or whatever. Goodness. Like, we cannot control that, but we can. There are elements of things that are still happening that we do have some agency on. And sometimes we need kind of reminding of that. So. And it's been really cool to see the different stories that people have written and some of the things that they've shared. Like, someone was, a couple of weeks ago in one of the sessions, someone was like, oh, I'd only really thought about this in my head previously as like, if this outcome is, if I manage to keep my job here, because, like I said, significant change is happening. If I keep my job here, it's good. And if I lose it, it's bad. But I hadn't even thought about the fact that I might keep my job here, and with all the changes that have happened, I might hate it. She was like, I had to start thinking about what do I do in that scenario?
Wow.
And it was so cool. I was like, oh, yeah, that's amazing. So there's multiple different ways that this can play out. And other people were like, oh, I've been joking for the last decade about wanting to work in the post office, or I want to be a baker, or, all these things. And they're like, oh, maybe now is the time, especially if they get a payout and things, because, there's some uncertainty there for, some people in those situations, of course, or, other people going through that, which there's a lot of that happening right now. Maybe this is a chance to actually try a different future on as well. And so being able to write that out and just sort of, even if it's super rough, it doesn't need to be like a beautiful novel or anything like that. Bullet points is fine. And I saw we were doing these sessions were all virtual, and one of the people had put like all these sort of sticky notes of all these different futures that may play out, just like super simple, like sort of 6 or 7 different things, and like what would happen in the next 3 years for them. And it was great because they were like, oh, I just stretched my thinking like so much further by doing this activity than I had just thinking like a more binary kind of outcome.
Good, bad.
Yeah, good,
Keeping
bad.
my job is good. Being made redundant is bad.
Exactly, yeah. But actually realising there's actually multiple other things, pathways.
I want to dig into something that I've noticed about you for a long time.
This is where you're going to bring it up.
I'm finally going to tell you what I really think. You're like, okay, here
Live
we
on
go.
air.
Buckle up, Steph.
Could have saved it for a voice note. Okay?
I'll share.
Be good content.
Yes. Okay, one thing I've noticed you say versus other futurists say, and I always say futurist wrong. Anyway, one thing you say that I love that I've never asked you about that I hear other people talk about. So the other futurists will say the future of work. And you consistently say futures. Can you tell me about that?
So that is the technique, like it is futures thinking. It's not future thinking. So probably most people who have been trained, and I don't want to be like real snobby about this type of stuff, but probably most people who have been trained in futures thinking and strategic foresight will purposely use the S, because there are multiple futures. There is not just one future. And therefore, it's futures of work or futures of blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Because it's so funny, like having grown up in HR, still growing up, but you would always see these keynote sessions on someone's talking about the future of work as if there's one future of work. And I love the hearing you talk about it of going futures. And I like this other thing that you said, and I've written it down. Try a different future on. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. This is one of my favourite things about this work and the sort of science behind it and things, which is that when we think about ourselves in the future, even not that far in the future, but certainly when we're thinking much further in the future, it's like we are sort of zoomed out looking at a stranger. So we get to, the language often, quite a few of us will use, which I can't remember the original origin of, is around you can play with the future from the safety of the present. Because you can try on these different futures, you can try on these different worlds and things like that. But from the relative safety of the present to be like, what if I change that? What if I change that? Because it's just exploratory. And then you roll it back and you do the backcasting, you make decisions and actions based on, actually, I'd like to move towards that. And these are the things I need to mitigate because these other things might happen during that time. Yeah.
I love that visual of try a different future on, because I think about when I go somewhere and I'm going somewhere nice and I will try 5 different outfits on in front of the mirror and be like, the other one looks kind of good, but does this one look good? Or actually, no, I'm going to change again. And then I get my husband's advice on which one do you think looks better? But I like the visual of I'm not there yet at the place, so I can play around with what my outfit wants to look like and then go, which one's best?
Yeah.
And there's good options. They're all good. I like all the colours, but which one feels best in this moment? And I think when you use that language of try a different future on, when you're in the present, you're just kind of looking at your future self. How might you do that? And I'd even love to, if for you personally, if you think about how you think about your own future or futures, how would you do this for yourself?
a bit of a mixture. So sometimes I will actually write down like this is what it could look like, or this, in 10 years I'm doing these things or whatever, which is more than, I suppose, some people use that in like visioning and whatever. There's like different ways of doing it. Sometimes it is just doing a real map or like a sort of brainstormy thing around this option or that option or that option. But I think more often what I think about is what could go wrong, like over the next 5 years, whatever. If I, think of the things that I read about and I'm spending time thinking about, etc. What are the things that could go wrong? What's the impact going to be on my work, my life, etc., etc. And how could I be better prepared for those things to, if those things play out or a version of those play out? Because I'm never going to get it right. That's not the job. Well, that's not the point. So, it's more around, right, what are the bad things that could happen? How can I be best prepared that if those things do happen, I've got the right skills, or I've got the money put away, or I'm living in the place that is safer, or whatever it happens to be. So I think it's more. I probably start from the bad, like the bad things. What are the big bad things, and how would me and the people around me, how would we be okay in that situation?
I love that. It kind of speaks to like Tim Ferriss's fear setting example of, well, if I confront the risk points, the pain points, and I have some strategies in place to deal with it, then when those things do come up or don't, but if they do, I'm prepared for them.
Do you want a really cool thing on like the neuroscience of this? So the Institute for the Future in 2008, they did a like a real kind of lo-fi scenario. And it was about a 5 or 6 day exercise. Everyone logged on to this kind of forum, and every day they were given a different prompt about like, okay, now this news report's come in, and and this scenario was set 10 years in the future, 2018. And it was based around 10 years in the future, a respiratory pandemic going around the world.
No way.
And that was not because they were great at prediction or anything. Like, we were well overdue a pandemic. Like, that had been well known for a long time. So it was not beyond the scope. If you were looking hard enough and you're kind of doing that good signal scanning around all the other things, that was obvious that was going to happen at some point in the next couple of decades. So anyway, so they did this scenario. People logged in. There was no, bunker with hazmat suits that everyone was going to. It was just purely a thought exercise that people were doing, after work or whatever, or in their lunch break or whatever, online. Anyway, fast forward 12 years and, spoiler alert, there was a respiratory pandemic that went around the world in 2020. And Jane McGonigal, who I mentioned earlier, she's the director of the Institute for the Future. She was getting all these messages like, hey, Jane, I came to that thing you did 12 years ago. Like, I don't really know what's going on. I'm still scared and everyone's freaking out. But I kind of feel like I've been here before. Like, I kind of feel like I'm prepared. Because, kids I didn't even have or even know I was going to have 12 years ago that I've now got. I knew they were going to have to stay home from school because we talked about that in that situation, that sort of thing 12 years ago. And obviously the context looks different. Like, the internet's better in 2020 than it was in 2008. People have got Zoom. There's all these different things. The conditions are different. But the point was, people felt like they'd kind of practiced this. And when they've done fMRI studies on people who are practicing thinking about the future, they're doing episodic futures thinking, which is the kind of technical name for it. They can see that the thinking or the brain bits are lit up in the same parts of the brain as the memory is. So you're actually creating kind of future memories, logging it as a memory. And then when you're in a similar or even the same, but probably more likely a similar situation in the future, your memory goes, we know what to do here. Or we've got some level of kind of, similar thinking that we can draw on here.
Oh my goodness, I love that.
So good as well.
I love that. I'm just to understand even like the neuroscience behind it of going, if you've thought about the future and you've imagined yourself in different scenarios and dealing with those challenges.
Tried them on, yep.
If you've tried them on, then if that thing eventuates, it comes up almost like a memory.
Yeah.
I reckon that's so profound.
Yeah, I know. It is. And yet we are still stuck in our inboxes thinking about what's happening in 5 minutes' time in most organizations because organizations are short-term places. They are the next quarter, the next financial year, this week, the end of the day, end of business, that kind of thing. And so we're constantly only ever thinking about what's in front of us because no one is getting rewarded or recognised or remunerated or paid for what might not happen, we might try and avoid in 5 years' time. No one is recognised for that. And sometimes to do something that is slightly more futures, flexible or whatever, requires some courage, and it requires doing something maybe counterintuitive or different. And I reckon a lot of leaders are kind of in safe mode most of the time and keep everything as it is, don't scare anyone, don't do anything different, and we'll all be okay. And no one will kind of laugh at me or ask me what I'm doing because I'm doing something, unusual. And then we end up at where we are with most places then going through these big waves of, hiring all these people during and after COVID, and then everyone going, oh, this feels like it's going to end badly. And then, look where we are now. Oh, everyone's being
made redundant.
All these people are being laid off. And it's like, well, of course. Because no one thought about different models around ways of working. No one thought about doing, structuring things differently. No one thought, oh, this might just be a weird kind of up blip kind of thing and not actually be sustainable. So maybe we shouldn't be taking on all this extra kind of overhead and all this, these extra people, blah, blah, blah. And we end up then, and so many times when we look at either organizational failures and I don't necessarily just mean collapses, I mean like the stuff that happens maybe in organizations, things that led to royal commissions, things that have led to all these other problems, people have sleepwalked into them because sleepwalked.
Yeah.
People have sleepwalked into them because they didn't think about what might happen next, the possible futures that may play out, and the really obvious unintended consequences of those remuneration structures or that particular industry or whatever it is, because that's not how people are rewarded.
So many places I want to take this conversation. I really feel like I want to pick up on the unintended consequences because I think there's so much to unpack in all this. So I'm trying to decide where to go. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, I'm just going to keep it uncertain as to where we're going.
I don't like it.
You can try it on for a moment over the break and we'll come back in a sec.
Do you want to grow in your career? Are you after a fresh start or some inspiration? Or perhaps you're in a career crisis? The book Sort Your Career Out and Make More Money by Shelley Johnson and Glenn James is such a great resource at any stage in your career. It will give you practical strategies for things like getting a promotion, making more money, moving into a leadership role, taking career risks, or if it's time to quit your job, and so much more. You can find Sort Your Career Out and Make More Money wherever good books are sold or via the link in the podcast show notes. It's also available as an audiobook.
I really appreciate this conversation, Steph. So let's think about this. When I've captured, let's say I've done my little
4 minutes.
We've got 4 minutes. Yeah, she's kept us on.
I love that. We had that break there with the
yeah.
That was
We're
at least 10.
Well, you're keeping us to time, which I really, really appreciate. Let's say I've done my little quadrant. I've mapped out, to my best knowledge right now, the possible futures. Here's the high impact, high uncertainty things. The things that kind of keep me up at night that are in that kind of scary quadrant.
Yeah.
How would you help people manage the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with the future or possible futures?
That is really hard. And it's also really hard, and again, there's obviously all this nuance around this as well, with different groups as well. Like if you've got a group who have been marginalised, traumatised, etc., actually people who have been in those sort of really high stress situations actually can't think about the future. So their brains are in just such fight or flight, immediate mode, survival mode, that actually is incredibly difficult for some groups to think about the future for that reason. So you have to acknowledge that, and you can't just go into these things and be like, well, we're going to think about the future. You've got to kind of know what grief exists in the room as well, because this organisation I'm working with, who are going through this kind of existential level change and elements of uncertainty with that as well. We talk about that. We talk about that through this workshop, through this process, and the leadership there have done a fantastic job of keeping people informed and doing what they can, etc. So they've done a pretty good job, but that's obviously not always the case. So anyway, so we need to acknowledge the grief and things that exist around this stuff, and that people will have a whole myriad of feelings. And for some people, this stuff's really exciting. One of my friends is like, oh, God, what if there's no jobs? What if all the thing? What if everything collapses? And she's really amped up about it I think it'd be really different. How cool. And obviously for other people, they're like, oh, God, I don't know what I would do. Things look really scary and they're kind of going to pieces over it. So you can't just kind of assume that everyone feels the same as you about a particular change. And a couple of years ago, I went to this session and there was a sci-fi writer and she writes stories and scenarios for like the UN and the World Bank, like these kind of like real, kind of global organizations. And she was saying it's always easier to write dystopia because dystopia, like generally, despite all the differences in the world, there is sort of some stuff which fundamentally everyone is like, yeah, that'd be pretty bad. Like everyone being killed off, meteors, bad stuff. Whereas utopia, really hard because someone's utopia is someone else's dystopia. Like for some people, like a universal basic income, which has been, surprisingly weirdly quiet since all the AI stuff came out, which it shouldn't have been. But anyway, universal basic income or something. For some people, they're like, oh, God, imagine what could be possible if everyone had this like this safety net of income, blah, blah, blah. And others are like, no, it'd make everyone lazy and we don't like it. So like for some people, even these things that feel like good is someone else's like
dystopia.
Very bad dystopia. Yeah. So I just think there's all of that you have to kind of think about when you're facilitating this type of conversation, this type of experience for someone, which is why I really love being able to bring like the futures and the facilitation kind of bits of my worlds together in this. But in terms of then, I do think that writing those things out and actually spending the time plotting them and going like, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? How would I react? What would the things be? Starts to create not falsely, I don't think, but like a little bit more agency and a little bit more control. Because even though it might be really overwhelming, be like, oh God, I'm not prepared for any of those. It's like, okay, cool. But now you're at the stage where you've thought about them enough to go, okay, but there's some of those I could start preparing for, even if you're not at the moment. Like, what is then starting to do that? Like, it feels like a very proactive thing to be doing. And maybe that's false, kind of false positives or whatever in that way. But I think it seems to be genuinely helpful for people to do that.
I think it's kind of like, it makes me think about exposure therapy. Like just actually exposing yourself to what those futures are. You're like, okay, I can get comfortable with that. Like the other day we were looking at AI training stuff because our business is like leadership development training essentially. And we're looking at different AI training tools. And I looked at them and I'm like, oh, some of this scares me. But it's a bit of exposure therapy. And exposure therapy, if you kind of go to, okay, cool, well, how could I actually use this rather than be scared of it?
Yeah.
And like testing just building up my tolerance for, okay, cool. What might that mean? How might we get on the front foot rather than, I think the temptation when you are scared of something is to bury your head in the sand about it.
Yeah. And I think that's AI is a great example of that. I know there are a huge number of people out there at the moment who have now got to the stage where they're like, oh God, I've ignored this too long and now I'm so far behind. Or that's how they feel. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Like they feel like they're so far behind that there's kind of like no hope. And they're like, well, I'm stuffed because I don't know enough. I haven't played with it. I don't know where to even start. But also the irony of that being that like nobody knows. It's everyone's making all that one up because there's very few experts.
I also think it reminds me of when's the best time to start investing in the stock market? Like 30 years ago. Yeah. When's the next best time? Today.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same with when you think about AI and any type of skill you want to build. When's the best time to start? Well, when ChatGPT first started, all the noise was around it, which was a terrible time. Okay, when's the next best time? Right now, today. And simply just jumping on ChatGPT or whatever your model is of choice.
Your
whatever.
Of choice.
Yes, but actually saying, I feel behind. I'm struggling. This is my role. I'm going to upload my job description. Where should I begin?
Nice. Yeah.
And I love what you're saying about actually none of us know.
Yeah.
I think going back to one beautiful thing you said up front, which is the future is predictably unpredictable. And I just think, okay, well then if we're in an unpredictable, uncertain world, what can I do to feel some agency? And I guess this is probably my last question. I have so many other questions. Again, all the questions we didn't get to on our list. But if I was to ask you, okay, I want to start today in some of this stuff. I want to really start to build my to try on some different futures. What would you tell someone listening right now who maybe hasn't done this work that feels like, okay, I'm going to start today?
One of my favourite quotes, which I use pretty much at the end of all my workshops, is from one of my favourite artists, which is David Bowie, which is, "The future belongs to those who hear it coming." And so I think one of the first things you can do is just read a little bit more broadly around what is happening. Like pick a topic, pick your industry, pick your job, whatever it is. Do a little Google, go onto your Kraken of choice, your ChatGPT or
Kraken of choice.
and use one of those and say, like, what is the future of this? And go to The Verge, go to Wired, go to some like different types of publications that you don't normally read, go to Substack, go to like some different places and just be like, oh, what are other people thinking about this? Like, where are those signals of change happening? And I think if you can have like a good diverse diet of inputs, and this is not about kind of creating more overwhelm, but you're probably, there's probably some time you can replace from doom scrolling and actually do some like, I don't know, there's probably not a good opposite word I can come up with from doom scrolling. But
just general scrolling.
Yeah, just general, like useful scrolling, good scrolling. And, watch a couple of videos or do some things that make you go, oh, okay, this is possible. Because I think what we need to actually do is broaden our imaginations. Like a lot of what we will fall into, the traps we'll fall into will be failures of imagination because we failed to think about what might happen and therefore be ready for it. And if you don't want a failure of imagination, you need a better imagination. And that probably means reading more fiction than you are nonfiction. Like the amount of people I'm talking to at the moment who have gone, like, I'm just done with nonfiction. I'm getting into fiction because, number one, partly just from a brain break, but also they're just like, I just feel like that's what I need. I need more like story. I need more imagination rather than just more like models and frameworks. That's just not working anymore. So I think reading more fiction and actually watching more sci-fi, like that for me, like beginning of last year, that became my kind of next personal development thing was to read and to watch more sci-fi because there is so much stuff in sci-fi that is speculative, that is, into a future that we may not ever reach, but it starts to trigger the thoughts around, what if that happened? And what if a different version of that happened? Like it might not be in space, but it might be, in Melbourne, or a different version of that. Because all of it is dynamics and things.
I love that concept of a failure of imagination. And you know what I like about the imagination word is I feel with your imagination, it has a level of optimism built in. And I know you said you're not an AI optimist, and I would probably agree with you on that. I feel it's hard to be optimistic. But I like the idea of, well, what do I have agency over? I actually do have agency over my imagination. I want to imagine the possible futures and I want to also imagine me handling them.
Yeah. Like I think we should ask the question. And actually South by Southwest Sydney last week, KPMG had a set up with Peter Marion, who's the head of their kind of foresight and futures part there. Her and her team created this thing. It was around the question, what if it all goes right? Which again, that's not true because it won't all go right. It can never all go right and it won't all go wrong either. Like there will always be winners and losers. They may be different winners and losers to today, but there will always be winners and losers. And so good futures work is not creating a utopia. Like what we don't want to do is imagine a utopia necessarily because that's probably not what's going to happen. Like we need to make sure we're actually thinking about the weird stuff, the bad stuff, the hard stuff, because otherwise it's not probably very useful. So having that imagination, and actually, like you say, your imagination is probably going to be the thing that sets you apart. Because if everyone starts outsourcing their brains in the way that they currently are, like that is going to set you apart if you still can use yours.
Oh yeah, the critical thinking skill is going to become so highly prized because people are getting all these AI tools to critically think for them, and
imagine things, which it can only do based anyway.
Another podcast, along with our eating in airports, the things that happen in airports, plus outsourcing your brain.
Yeah,
Steph, people are going to want to find you and connect with you. Where should they do that?
LinkedIn is where I'm most regularly haunting, which is
haunting.
So Steph, S-T-E-P-H, and then Clarke, C-L-A-R-K-E, and then normally if you type in Steph Clarke futurist, that kind of pops me up a little bit easier than the horrible search function that they have. And then Substack, I have a Substack called How to Friend. And if you follow me there, I've then also got one called The Bookmark, which is where I also talk about the future and other things I've been reading and the sci-fi I've been watching and stuff like that too.
And if you are in HR and in an organisation that feels like they need work and help with this, Steph has an amazing business called 28 Thursdays. She's a facilitator with exec teams, with leadership teams, helping them navigate the unknown futures.
Sure do.
Thank you so much for hanging out.
Thanks.
If you enjoy this podcast, can you share it with a friend who needs to hear it? And I'd love you to give us a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple, because that helps us get the pod out there. Thanks heaps.
If you have enjoyed the show today, forward it to a friend, colleague, or family member who you may think it would benefit. Shelley's business Boldside provides leadership training for a variety of different businesses. To learn more, visit boldside.com.au. If you would like to book Shelley to speak at one of your events, please reach out to the team via moneypodcast.com.au.